Daniel Foster had always loved quiet places, and the remote areas of eastern Arizona were the kind of places that made him feel alive. He had spent years traveling around the country taking photos of wildlife, mountains, rivers, and anything that carried a story. On this particular morning, he drove along a narrow dirt road that twisted through tall pines and desert shrubs. The sun was only beginning to rise, sending soft orange light across the land. And Daniel felt the same calm he always felt when the world was waking up. He stopped at a wide clearing near the San Carlos River, a place he had marked on his map long ago but never had the chance to visit. The air smelled fresh, filled with the scent of wet soil and pine leaves. He stepped out of his truck, stretched his arms, and listened. There was nothing but the sound of running water, a few chirping birds, and the soft rustling of the wind moving through the trees. It felt like a place untouched by noise and worries. Daniel grabbed his camera bag and walked toward the river. The water shimmered under the morning light, flowing steadily over smooth stones. He walked along the bank, looking for good spots to take photos. He crouched to take a close-up shot of the water rippling around a rock when something faint caught his attention. At first, he thought it was a bird call or maybe a branch falling into the river. But then he heard it again, a short, sharp sound that didn't blend with nature. He stood still and listened carefully. The sound came again, louder this time. It was not an animal, and it was not the wind. It was a human sound, high, frightened, and thin, as if someone was calling for help but didn't have the strength to shout. Daniel felt a chill run up his spine. He turned and scanned the area along the river. The trees on the opposite side were thick, and the water between them flowed stronger there. Something moved near the edge, something small. He stepped closer and saw her. A little girl stood on a rock that was slick with moss, her arms stretched out for balance. She looked like she was trying to step back to solid ground, but the rock beneath her feet tilted slightly with the current pressing against it. She wobbled, trying to keep her footing. Daniel's heart tightened. He took a few fast steps forward and called out to her, but she didn't turn her head. Maybe she didn't hear him over the rushing water. Before he could call again, the rock shifted under the girl's feet. Her small body slipped sideways, and in a moment that made Daniel's stomach drop, she plunged into the river. She did not scream. There was only a splash and then a rush of water pulling her forward. Daniel threw his camera bag to the ground and sprinted. He did not think. He only moved. The cold water hit him hard as he jumped into the river, but he pushed through it with all the strength he had. The girl's dark hair floated on the surface for a moment before the current dragged her under again. Daniel swam as fast as he could, forcing his arms through the water. He caught sight of her again, her small hand breaking the surface as she tried to grab something, anything, but the current was too strong for someone her size. He pushed harder, his legs kicking against the pull of the river. When he got close enough, he reached out and grabbed her wrist. Her skin felt ice cold, and she clung to him the moment he touched her, her tiny fingers locking around his arm with surprising strength. The river pushed at them both, fighting to pull them along, but Daniel gathered her into his arms and held her against his chest. He turned his body sideways to the current, forcing his way toward the riverbank inch by inch. His feet finally touched a solid rock beneath the surface. He steadied himself and climbed toward the shore, lifting the girl above the water. When he reached dry ground, he fell to his knees, breathing hard. The girl clung to him so tightly that he had to hold her to keep her from slipping off his lap. Her chest rose and fell in quick, sharp breaths. Daniel pushed her wet hair gently away from her face. She looked no older than 8. Her dark eyes were wide, full of shock, fear, and something deeper, something quiet and almost lost. She didn't make a sound. She didn't cry. She only stared up at him as if he were the only thing keeping her safe. "It's okay," Daniel said softly, though he wasn't sure if she understood him. "You're safe now." A moment passed, then another. The girl continued staring at him before she slowly reached out and touched his shirt, gripping the fabric as if checking he was real. Daniel could tell she was shaking, so he wrapped his jacket around her small shoulders. He looked around for any sign of other people, family, friends, someone calling her name. But there was only silence. The river flowed on as if nothing unusual had happened. The woods stood still. The girl sat pressed against him, quiet and watchful. "What's your name?" he asked in a gentle voice. She didn't answer at first. She lowered her head, her eyes focusing on his hand as if the sound of his words made her nervous. He waited patiently, letting the calm return to her slowly. After a long minute, she spoke one soft word. "Nayeli." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was clear enough. Daniel nodded and gave her an encouraging smile. "Hi, Nayeli," he said. "I'm Daniel." She blinked, as if trying to remember it, then looked up at him again. There was something in her eyes now, something more trusting than before. She still looked scared, but she wasn't frozen anymore. Daniel checked her arms and legs for injuries. She seemed unhurt, only shaken and exhausted. Her clothes were soaked, and she shivered against his jacket, so he held her closer to warm her. "Where are your parents? Are they nearby?" he asked. Nayeli looked toward the trees for a moment, then back at him. She didn't speak. Her eyes lowered again, and she clung to his jacket as if the question made her unsure or afraid. Daniel didn't press her. He figured she needed time, and he didn't want to push her into panic. Instead, he stood up slowly and lifted her into his arms. She didn't resist. In fact, she wrapped her arms around his neck as if it felt natural to her, as if she needed someone to hold on to. He walked back toward his truck with careful steps, feeling the soft weight of the little girl resting against him. The morning sun had risen higher now, warming the land. Birds moved from tree branch to tree branch, but Daniel hardly noticed. His mind was full of questions. Where she came from, why she was alone by the river, what had happened before he arrived. But above all, he felt a strong sense of responsibility. This child had looked into his eyes as if her whole world depended on him. When he reached his truck, he set her down gently on the seat, wrapped her in a blanket from the back, and started the heater. She sat quietly, watching him with those dark, steady eyes. Most children would have cried or asked questions or tried to explain. Nayeli did none of that. She only watched him, her expression calm but guarded, as if she were trying to decide whether she could trust him fully. Daniel offered her a bottle of water. She took it with both hands and drank slowly. Every movement she made was cautious, small, and silent. It was clear to Daniel that she had not grown up carefree like many children he had met. Something about her told him she was used to being careful, used to silence, used to holding her feelings inside. "Don't worry," he said again, speaking with the same gentle tone. "I'll help you get home. I'll make sure you're okay." Nayeli nodded slowly, as if the promise settled something inside her. She leaned back against the seat and kept her eyes on him. She didn't look away even once, as if she feared that if she blinked, he might disappear. Daniel sat down in the driver's seat, took a deep breath, and looked over at her again. She was so small, so quiet, and yet she carried a presence that touched something deep in him. He had saved people before in small ways, giving directions, helping someone with a flat tire. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Something his heart recognized even if his mind didn't understand it yet. As he started the engine, Nayeli lifted her hand slightly as if to make sure he wasn't leaving without her. He gave her a reassuring smile, and she relaxed, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this moment by the river would be the start of a bond neither of them could ever forget. And from that very moment, the little Apache girl who had nearly been taken by the river decided to follow him. quietly, faithfully, and with a trust that would reshape both of their lives. Daniel woke up early the next morning, long before the sun rose over the tall pines. He had slept inside his truck the night before, keeping the heater running at intervals so Nayeli wouldn't get cold. She had fallen asleep wrapped in his blanket, curled up on the passenger seat like a small bird hiding from the world. Every so often during the night, she would shift or tighten her hold on the blanket, but she never made a sound. Now, as the pale morning light touched the sky, Daniel slowly sat up and stretched. His neck felt stiff from sleeping half-seated, but he didn't mind. The first thing he did was check on Nayeli. She still slept peacefully, her face calm, her long, dark hair gently resting across her cheek. For a moment, he just watched her. It was hard to believe that only yesterday he'd pulled her out of a rushing river. She looked so quiet, so still, as if she belonged in a peaceful dream rather than a dangerous world. Daniel stepped outside the truck quietly so he wouldn't wake her. The morning air was cool, and the sound of the river flowed softly in the background. He took a deep breath and rubbed his hands together, thinking about the day ahead. His plan was simple. Find Nayeli's family or the local authorities who could help her return home safely. He walked around the campsite for a moment, letting his thoughts settle. The forest around him was calm, but he felt a weight inside his chest. Something about the little girl had touched him deeply. He had rescued people before in different situations, but this felt different. He felt responsible for her in a way he couldn't explain. When he returned to the truck, he found the passenger door slightly open. Nayeli stood outside, barefoot, wrapped in the blanket, looking at him with wide, watchful eyes. She didn't speak, didn't smile or frown. She simply stared at him, as if waiting for him to tell her what to do next. Daniel raised his hands gently to show he meant no harm. "Good morning, Nayeli. You scared me. I thought you were still sleeping." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward him slowly and stood beside him as if it were the most natural place for her to be. She kept the blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders, but she stepped close enough to lightly touch his arm with the edge of it. It was almost like she needed to make sure he hadn't disappeared during the night. Daniel smiled softly. "I'm not leaving you. Don't worry." For a moment, her tight shoulders relaxed just a little. He made a simple breakfast, bread, fruit, and warm tea from a small camping stove. Nayeli sat on a rock nearby, watching everything he did. When he offered her food, she took it with both hands and ate slowly, carefully. Every small motion she made seemed thoughtful, as if she had learned long ago to never waste anything. After breakfast, Daniel packed his gear into the truck. He expected Nayeli to stay sitting on the rock while he worked, but she didn't. The moment he took a step away from the truck, she moved too. When he circled around to tie down his equipment, she followed behind him. If he stopped, she stopped. If he walked to the river to wash his hands, she was right there with him, just a few steps behind. At first, Daniel thought maybe she was nervous being alone in the woods. But as the morning went on, he realized something else. She wasn't following him because she was afraid of the forest. She was following him because she had decided he was the only person she trusted. It was a quiet trust, but a strong one. When the truck was ready, Daniel opened the passenger door for her. She climbed in without a word and wrapped the blanket around her again. She watched him as he walked around to the driver's side, and only when he sat down did she let out a small breath, as if relieved. He started the engine and pulled onto the narrow dirt road. The trees passed by slowly, the golden sunrise lighting them from behind. "We're going to look for your family," he said gently. "Or someone who knows you, okay?" Nayeli didn't answer. She just looked at him with those deep eyes that seemed to hold stories she couldn't say out loud. They drove to the nearest small trading post about 20 minutes away. It was a simple wooden building with a dusty parking area and a wind chime that rang softly in the breeze. Daniel parked the truck and turned to Nayeli. "Come with me," he said. "Maybe someone here knows you." She nodded and stepped out of the truck, sticking close enough that her shoulder almost brushed his arm. When Daniel took a few steps toward the entrance, she matched his pace instantly. Inside, the trading post smelled of wood and spices. An older woman stood behind the counter, arranging handmade jewelry. She looked up when they walked in. "Good morning," Daniel said with a polite smile. "I'm looking for help. This girl—" But before he could finish, the woman looked closely at Nayeli and nodded softly. "She's from the reservation," the woman said gently. "I've seen her before." Daniel felt a small wave of relief. "Good. I was hoping someone might recognize her. Do you know where I should take her?" The woman paused, her eyes softening. "Her family situation is complicated. She's a quiet one. Doesn't speak much." Daniel looked down at Nayeli, who stood half-hidden behind him, clutching the blanket. "Is she safe here?" he asked. "Oh, yes," the woman said kindly. "The reservation is only a few miles north. They have people who can help her." Daniel nodded gratefully. "Thank you." He gently guided Nayeli back to the truck. She climbed in without hesitation, but her eyes searched his face carefully, as if trying to read his thoughts. "We're going to take you home," he said softly. But even as he spoke the words, he felt a strange ache in his chest, like he knew that sending her home didn't mean she would stop needing him. They drove north toward the reservation. The land opened into wide fields and clusters of homes. Children played outside. Adults worked, talked, or tended to their chores. Life here was simple and familiar. Daniel parked near a small community building where a tribal social worker greeted them. She introduced herself kindly and gestured for Daniel to bring Nayeli inside. Nayeli didn't want to let go of his hand. She stood close to him, her small fingers curled tightly around his. When the social worker knelt down to speak to her, Nayeli looked at her politely but didn't step away from Daniel. Even when the woman asked gentle questions, her name, her family's name, where she had been, Nayeli stayed silent. "She trusts you," the social worker finally said to Daniel. "It's unusual. She doesn't connect easily with people." Daniel felt the weight of that sentence settle inside him. He squatted down next to Nayeli. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe. They're here to help." Slowly, she moved one step closer to him, tightening her grip instead of letting go. The social worker smiled softly. "You can stay with us for a little while," she said. "Just until she feels comfortable." Daniel agreed. Over the next few hours, he stayed in the community building, filling out forms and answering questions about how he found Nayeli. Yet no matter where he went, Nayeli followed. If he walked to the drinking fountain, she went too. If he stepped outside to make a phone call, she stood right beside him. Every time someone else tried to guide her, she looked back at him with silent worry until he returned. It was clear she felt safer with him than with anyone else. By late afternoon, Daniel thought he had done everything he needed to do. He stood to leave, but when he looked down, Nayeli was at his side again, holding the edge of his shirt lightly between her fingers. He sighed softly, not out of frustration but out of deep emotion. He knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "I have to go for a little while," he said gently. "You'll be okay here?" But Nayeli shook her head slowly. Her eyes were full of something he recognized, fear of being left behind again. Before he could speak again, the social worker stepped forward. "You can visit her again," she said kindly. "It might help her feel safe." Daniel looked at Nayeli's small face, her hopeful eyes, her quiet plea. "Of course I'll visit," he said softly. "I promise." Her hand loosened slightly, but she still didn't move away. She looked at him with a mixture of sadness and trust, as if she was giving him a piece of her heart and hoping he wouldn't break it. Daniel stood. took one slow breath, and finally walked toward the exit. Nayeli followed him until the social worker gently stopped her. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She only watched him walk away. And in that moment, Daniel realized something deeply. The little Apache girl he had pulled from the river wasn't going to let him go easily. And maybe he didn't want her to. Daniel returned to the reservation the next morning with a feeling he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was worry. Maybe it was responsibility. Or maybe it was something gentler. Something that felt like a quiet bond forming between him and the little girl who had almost been lost to the river. Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. He had promised he would visit her, and promises meant something to him. When he parked near the community building, he saw a few people walking around, busy with their morning routines. Some greeted him with a polite nod, and he nodded back. But his eyes searched for only one person. He didn't have to search long. Nayeli stood near the doorway, holding a small woven bracelet in her hand. The moment she saw him step out of his truck, her eyes lit up in a way he hadn't expected. She didn't run to him, but she walked quickly, her steps light and determined. She came right up to him and stopped just close enough to lightly touch his sleeve with her fingers, as if making sure he was real before believing her own eyes. "Good morning," Daniel said softly. She didn't speak, but she handed him the bracelet. It was made of thin strips of colorful thread carefully woven together. Daniel accepted it gently, touched by the simple gift. "Did you make this?" he asked. Nayeli nodded once. He smiled. "Thank you. It's beautiful." The social worker came outside just then, giving a knowing smile. "She's been waiting for you since sunrise," she said. "Stood by the window the whole morning." Daniel's heart pulled in a way that surprised him. "Is she doing okay?" "She's quiet," the woman replied. "But calm, more calm than we usually see her. She trusts you." Nayeli moved a little closer to Daniel, standing near his side like a shadow that belonged only to him. The woman noticed and nodded gently. "You're welcome to spend some time with her. This will help her feel comfortable." Daniel agreed and took Nayeli for a walk around the area. He didn't hold her hand at first, but after a few steps, she reached for his fingers on her own. Her hand was small and soft, and she held on lightly, as if she was afraid he might pull away. They walked past houses, gardens, and open fields where children played. Some of the children called out to Nayeli, inviting her to join them, but she only looked at them quietly and tightened her grip on Daniel's hand. After a while, Daniel sat with her under a large tree. Its branches spread wide, offering shade from the sun. The air smelled like dry grass and fresh earth. He spoke softly, even though he knew she might not answer. "Do you live near here? Do you have family nearby?" Nayeli stared at the ground, drawing small shapes in the dirt with her finger. She didn't speak. Her silence wasn't refusal. It was something deeper, like speaking felt too heavy for her. Daniel didn't push her. He knew pushing wouldn't help. He simply stayed with her, letting the quiet settle between them. After some time, an older man walked by and paused when he saw Nayeli. He nodded at Daniel before speaking in a calm, warm voice. "She's a good kid," he said. "Just needs gentle people around her." Daniel nodded. "I'm trying to understand what she needs." The man sighed, leaning on his walking stick. "She lost a lot at a young age. Her family has been through hard times. She would wander around the woods alone sometimes, not because she wanted to, but because she didn't feel safe staying in one place." Daniel felt a soft ache in his chest. He looked down at Nayeli, who continued drawing in the dirt, pretending not to hear but clearly listening. The man added, "But she seems comfortable with you. That means something." After the man walked away, Daniel turned his attention back to Nayeli. "I'm here," he said quietly, I won't leave without telling you. Nayeli nodded a tiny bit, still not looking up. But that small nod meant trust, more trust than she had given anyone else. Later, the social worker invited Daniel inside to discuss more details about Nayeli's situation. Nayeli followed him inside immediately, staying close to his side. Even when they stepped into a small office, she stayed within arm's reach, lightly touching the back of his shirt. Inside, the social worker explained what they knew. Nayeli's family has faced many struggles, she said gently. Her mother passed away a few years ago. Her father travels for work and isn't always around. There isn't a steady home for her. She has relatives, but they have their own difficulties. Daniel listened carefully, his heart sinking with every detail. What about support programs? He asked. Schools, caretakers, anything stable? We try, she said sadly. But children who go through this kind of pain sometimes stop talking. They stop trusting. It takes time. And she's always been a wanderer, slipping away when she feels overwhelmed. Daniel looked over at Nayeli, who stood beside his chair, her fingers gently touching the wooden armrest. She glanced up at him, her eyes calm but full of something he couldn't quite name. She didn't wander today, Daniel said quietly. No, the social worker agreed, because she found someone she trusts. Daniel swallowed. I didn't expect this. No one expects it, she said. But maybe it's a good thing. Maybe she needed someone who came from the outside, someone new, someone who saw her differently. He didn't know what to say. He felt a heavy responsibility, but also a strange sense of connection, as if life had placed him in Nayeli's path for a reason he didn't yet understand. When the conversation ended, the social worker encouraged Daniel to stay in the area for a while if he could. Spend time with her, help her feel grounded. You're not responsible for her, but you might help her heal. Daniel agreed without hesitation. The next few days settled into a quiet routine. Daniel stayed at a small guest cabin near the reservation, and every morning he returned to see Nayeli. She was always waiting, for him and only him. If he sat on a bench, she sat beside him. If he walked to the river's edge, she followed. If he spoke to someone, she listened closely, her eyes always returning to him. She even began opening up in small ways. She didn't talk much. But she showed him things, like a small patch of wildflowers she liked, or a quiet spot under a tree where she sometimes sat alone. She collected little rocks and placed them in his hand one by one, explaining their colors with tiny, soft words. She smiled once, just once, but it was a small, shy smile that told Daniel he was making a difference. One afternoon, while they sat near the river, Daniel noticed she kept glancing at his camera bag. He opened it gently and pulled out his camera. You want to see? He asked. She nodded slightly. Daniel showed her how the camera worked. Her fingers touched the buttons carefully, and her eyes widened with curiosity. When Daniel helped her take a photo of a river stone, she looked at the image on the screen with quiet wonder. You have a good eye, he said. Her cheeks turned a soft shade of pink. For the first time since he met her, Nayeli reached out on her own and held his hand. Not out of fear, but out of comfort. She sat close to him, leaning ever so slightly against his arm. In that small moment, Daniel understood something deeply. Nayeli wasn't just following him because he had rescued her from the river. She followed him because in her quiet heart, she believed he was someone who wouldn't disappear. Someone steady. Someone who saw her. And Daniel, without meaning to, had begun to feel the same. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing clearly. He couldn't imagine walking away from this little girl who had chosen him with such pure trust, and he wasn't ready to let go of her either. Daniel stayed longer than he planned. What was supposed to be a short visit to help a lost girl return home slowly turned into days of being part of her quiet world. The reservation welcomed him kindly, and the people there understood that his presence brought a calmness to Nayeli that they had rarely seen in her. Daniel felt something change inside him, too. Each day he spent with her, he felt less like a visitor and more like someone who had a reason to be there. He started spending mornings photographing the land around the reservation, mountains glowing gold at sunrise, tall grasses swaying like waves, and rivers that shone like silver ribbons. But no matter where he went, Nayeli followed, and he didn't mind. He even found himself looking over his shoulder sometimes, checking to make sure she was close by, even before she appeared. One morning, Daniel walked down a narrow path lined with tall trees. He was searching for a place to take photos for the cultural program the tribe had invited him to contribute to. The air smelled crisp, and leaves crunched beneath his boots. Nayeli walked a careful step behind him, her small shoes making soft tapping sounds on the ground. She was quiet as always, but Daniel had learned to read her silence. She wasn't afraid. She was thinking. She noticed everything: the shape of leaves, the sound of distant water, the birds hopping from branch to branch. Sometimes she pointed to things without speaking, and Daniel photographed them, letting her guide his lens. They reached a small clearing where sunlight fell in patches through the trees. Daniel lifted his camera and began taking shots. He could feel Nayeli behind him, watching through her calm, curious eyes. After a few minutes, she walked to a fallen tree trunk and sat on it. She looked at him the way a child watches someone they trust, patiently, with soft attention. When Daniel lowered his camera, she raised her hand slightly, signaling him to come sit beside her. He did. The tree trunk was wide, and the forest was peaceful. Wind brushed the branches, and the light danced across her face. "You like it here, don't you?" Daniel asked gently. Nayeli nodded once. "Do you come here alone sometimes?" Another nod. Daniel looked around. The place did feel peaceful, almost like a hidden world only she understood. He smiled softly. "You can show me all your secret places if you want." She glanced up at him, her eyes warming with a small spark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny bead made of colored glass. She placed it in his hand without saying a word. It was her way of saying she trusted him even more now. Later that afternoon, Daniel met with some of the elders of the community. They had seen him with Nayeli for several days, and they understood how unusual it was for her to form such a close bond with someone. The eldest among them, a gentle woman with gray braids, spoke kindly. "She follows you because she feels safe," she said. "Children like her, they hold on to people who give them comfort. It is not something we can teach. It is something they choose." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I never expected this. I just wanted to help her." "And you did," the woman replied. "But healing doesn't happen in one day. She needs time, and she needs someone who will not disappear suddenly." Daniel understood what she meant. Nayeli had known too many people who came into her life and then left again, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. She had learned not to depend on anyone, but Daniel had given her a reason to trust again. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the mountains, Daniel and Nayeli sat near the riverbank. Daniel skipped a smooth stone across the water. It bounced 3 times before disappearing beneath the ripples. Nayeli picked up a stone too, much smaller than his, but she tried to skip it just like he had. It plopped into the water with a soft splash. She frowned slightly but didn't give up. She tried again and again, each time getting a little closer to making it bounce. Daniel laughed softly. "You'll get it." She looked up at him with a tiny, proud smile, the kind of smile he wished she showed more often. Moments like this made him realize how bright her spirit could be if given enough safety and support. The next day, Daniel began photographing cultural artifacts and community activities for a local heritage program. Children gathered around him, excited to see their photos on his camera screen. But while the other children laughed and played, Nayeli stayed close to him, holding on to the edge of his shirt to make sure he didn't wander too far. Some of the adults whispered among themselves, smiling gently. "She's found her person," one of them said softly. In the afternoon, the social worker approached Daniel again. She sat with him under a large tree while Nayeli collected small flowers nearby. "She's becoming more open," the woman said. "She's not hiding as much. She's even speaking a little more." Daniel glanced at Nayeli gathering white flowers and arranging them into a tiny bouquet. "She hasn't said more than a few words to me," he admitted. "She doesn't need many words with you," the woman said kindly. "She shows you trust in other ways." Daniel looked at the ground, unsure what to say. The social worker added, "She needs consistent people in her life. People who stay. People who show up." Daniel understood the message, even if it wasn't spoken plainly. Later that evening, Daniel decided to step away for a few minutes to gather equipment from his truck. When he returned, he found Nayeli standing at the doorway of the building, looking around frantically. Her breathing was fast, and her hands were trembling slightly. The moment she spotted him, she ran to him, fast, but still silent, and grabbed his sleeve tightly. Daniel knelt down and spoke softly. "Hey, I'm here. It's okay. I just went to the truck. I didn't leave." Nayeli looked into his eyes with an expression that carried more emotion than words ever could. She relaxed slowly, releasing a soft breath, as if she had been holding the world inside her chest. Daniel hugged her gently, not tightly, just enough to let her know she was safe. She rested her forehead against his shoulder for a moment, then stepped back, keeping her hand wrapped around his. That night, as Daniel walked her back to the building where she stayed, he felt something change again. Her footsteps were lighter, her eyes calmer. For the first time, she seemed to feel sure that he would come back, sure he wasn't just a passing visitor. Before entering, she tugged lightly at his sleeve and pressed something into his hand, a tiny woven charm shaped like a feather. She looked up at him, waiting. Daniel smiled gently. "I'll come tomorrow, I promise." She nodded, finally letting go of his hand. As Daniel walked back to his cabin, he realized how deeply connected he had become to Nayeli in such a short time. She had slipped into his life without a sound, without a plan, without warning. And now she had become a part of his days, his thoughts, and his sense of responsibility. She wasn't just the girl he had pulled from the river anymore. She was the girl whose presence had touched something inside him, softly, quietly, but powerfully. And Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't ready to walk away from her life. Not now. Not ever. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight spreading across the reservation like a warm blanket. Daniel woke up earlier than usual. He felt a strange excitement inside him, the kind that made him get ready faster, pack his camera bag more neatly, and check the time again and again, even though only a minute had passed. He wasn't sure why he felt this way, but he knew who he was looking forward to seeing. When he stepped outside, the air was cool and fresh. Birds called from the trees, and the sky glowed with pastel colors, pink, peach, and gentle gold. Daniel walked along the familiar path toward the community building where Nayeli usually spent her mornings. He wondered if she would be waiting at the door the way she sometimes did, standing silently with her hands tucked behind her back, her hair lifted slightly by the breeze. But today was different. When Daniel arrived, Nayeli wasn't there. He paused, unsure if he should go inside. Before he could decide, the social worker greeted him with a warm smile. "She's in the art room," she said. "She's been waiting for you, but she wanted to finish something first." Daniel followed her down the hallway. He could hear the quiet scratch of crayons on paper. When he reached the room, he saw Nayeli sitting at a small table, leaning forward as she drew carefully. Her long, dark hair fell over her shoulder, and she held the crayon with the serious concentration of someone trying to get every line perfect. Daniel knocked gently on the door frame. She looked up instantly, her eyes brightening as soon as she saw him. She didn't run to him, but the change in her expression was enough. It felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. He walked in slowly. "What are you working on?" Nayeli hesitated for a moment, then lifted her drawing and showed it to him. It was a picture of two figures, one tall, one small, standing near a river. The sky was blue, the sun yellow, and there were little green dots that Daniel assumed were grass. He smiled. "That's us, isn't it?" She nodded shyly. Daniel carefully took the picture from her hands, admiring every detail. She had drawn herself holding his hand. Something warm pressed gently against his heart, like someone placing a light inside him. "This is beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you." She looked down, bashful but pleased. The social worker watched from the doorway, her arms crossed gently, her eyes soft. "She's been drawing a lot since she met you," she whispered. "It's helping her express things she can't say." Daniel glanced back at the picture again, realizing it meant more than a child's drawing. It was a message, a quiet, hopeful message from a girl who rarely spoke. Later that day, the community held a small gathering outside near the open field. A few families were preparing food, children played in the grass, and elders sat under the shade of tall trees. Daniel had been invited to take photos for their cultural archive, but it didn't feel like work. It felt like being part of something meaningful. Nayeli stayed beside him as always. She didn't cling to him the way she had in the beginning, but she remained close enough that he could sense her presence, even without looking. Sometimes she tugged lightly at his sleeve and pointed at something she wanted him to photograph: an elder weaving a basket, a group of young boys practicing a traditional dance, a little girl holding a handmade drum. Every time she pointed, Daniel captured the moment, letting her guide his lens once again. In the middle of the gathering, one of the elders approached Daniel. He was a tall man with gentle eyes and long silver hair tied into a braid. "You have a good heart," the elder said. "She can feel it." Daniel looked down, unsure how to respond. The elder continued, "Some children open slowly, like flowers that only bloom when the weather is right. You've given her the right weather." Daniel listened carefully, absorbing the weight of the man's words. He had never thought of himself as someone capable of helping someone heal. He wasn't trained for it. He didn't have experience with children who carried their pain silently. Yet somehow, being with Nayeli felt natural. It felt important. As the afternoon went on, the gathering grew more lively. Music filled the air as people played drums in rhythmic patterns. Children ran across the grass laughing, and adults shared stories that drifted across the field like warm breezes. Nayeli, however, didn't run off with the other children. She stood beside Daniel, watching calmly. But he noticed her fingers tapping lightly against her leg, as if the music was stirring something inside her. "Do you want to dance?" Daniel asked. She looked up quickly, surprised. Her eyes widened slightly, as though the idea scared her and excited her at the same time. He offered his hand. She hesitated only for a moment before placing her small hand in his. He led her gently toward the edge of the circle where others danced. They didn't dance the traditional steps. Daniel didn't know them, but they swayed together softly, moving in their own simple rhythm. For the first time since he met her, Daniel heard her laugh, a quiet, breathy sound, barely louder than a whisper, but real. It was the kind of laugh that made a person stop and listen more closely. a fragile sound that felt like the cracking open of a long-locked door. Daniel felt something in his chest tighten, not in pain, but in emotion. Hearing her laugh felt like witnessing a small miracle. As evening approached, the sky shifted to a deep orange. Families began packing up food while children chased each other in the fading light. Daniel and Nayeli walked slowly toward the riverbank. It had become their place, a quiet spot that held the memory of their first meeting, their first real connection. Nayeli carried a small pouch of beads she had been given during the gathering. She opened it and gently poured a few into Daniel's hand. Each bead was carefully carved and dyed with delicate colors: blue, red, yellow, and soft white. "Are these for me?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes glowing with meaning. He held them tightly. "I'll keep them safe." They sat on the riverbank for a long time, listening to the gentle flow of the water. The wind rustled the leaves above them, and insects hummed softly in the background. It felt peaceful, like the world had paused just for them. Eventually, Daniel noticed that Nayeli had leaned slightly against his arm. Her head tilted just a little. She wasn't asleep, just resting, trusting the moment and the person beside her. Daniel looked down at her, realizing again how deeply she had settled into his life. Her presence wasn't a small thing. It wasn't something temporary. She had become a part of his thoughts, his routines, his sense of purpose. When the sky turned darker and the first star appeared, he gently nudged her. "It's time to get you back," he whispered. She nodded, rubbing her eyes lightly. They walked back slowly, their steps quiet. At the entrance of the building, she stopped and turned to him. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small, smooth stone, and placed it in his hand. Then she pressed her fingers against his palm for a moment, as if sealing a promise. Daniel smiled softly. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said. She nodded once. As she walked inside, Daniel watched her until the door closed gently behind her. He stood there for a long moment, feeling the cool evening air around him. Something inside him felt full of meaning, full of emotion, full of a growing connection he hadn't expected but welcomed. When he finally walked back to his cabin, he knew something with complete certainty. He wasn't simply visiting anymore. He wasn't just helping a lost girl. He was part of her world now, and she had quietly become part of his. And whatever the future held, he wasn't going anywhere.